The day my parents revealed their succession plan, I realized I no longer existed in their vision of the future. My name is Riley Quinn, the youngest daughter in a family where tradition wasn't just respected. It was law. My father built his law firm from the ground up. My mother ran our household like an extension of his office, and my sister followed his path, so perfectly it felt choreographed. That afternoon, we gathered in the firm's conference room. My father called it a family succession meeting. The table was covered in documents, each already stamped and signed. Every property, every share, every account had been transferred entirely to my sister. My name was nowhere to be found. I tried to steady my voice. "Is there a mistake?" I asked. My father didn't look up from the papers. "You get nothing," he said, calm and unyielding. No explanation, no pause, just those words echoing in the room. My mother looked down, silent. My sister didn't flinch. The decision had been made long before I walked in. The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a door closing forever. I stood, nodded once, and left before my voice could betray me. Outside, rain blurred the city lights as I made my way to the parking lot. I remember the night I told them I wanted to write code instead of becoming a lawyer. That had been the moment I stopped belonging to this family. Staring up at the firm's glowing sign, I whispered, "If they give me nothing, I'll build everything myself." I never imagined that the day they said you get nothing would become the day I gain everything. If you've ever been dismissed for following your own path, stay until the end. This story might be yours. 3 months before that day, everything had seemed normal. My father, Richard Quinn, was the founder of Quinn and Associates, a law firm that had grown to be the pride of our small city. He was known for his precision, discipline, and the belief that success could be inherited like an heirloom. My mother, Eleanor, managed both the firm's finances and our household with quiet authority, blending the two worlds seamlessly. My sister, Lydia, embodied everything they valued. Perfect posture, perfect timing, a future that seemed already written. She dressed like my mother, spoke like my father, and every family dinner inevitably circled back to her latest achievements. The pride in their voices sounded like applause. I felt proud of her too, though sometimes that pride weighed heavily. I, Riley, was the quiet one tucked in the corner, typing on an old laptop that wheezed every time I powered it on. While my family discussed clients and case files, I built small programs, crafting invisible worlds of logic and color. It wasn't glamorous, but it made me feel alive. I loved how lines of code could turn into something functional, something entirely my own. It felt like creating order in a life that often had none. One evening at dinner, the aroma of rosemary mixed with the faint bitterness of wine. My father asked about my college plans. His tone was polite, but loaded, a question that wasn't really a question at all. Lydia jumped in first, excitedly recounting the internship offered through one of his senior partners. My mother's eyes lit up as she reached across the table to touch Lydia's hand, already imagining the framed diploma that would soon hang beside my father's. When the conversation turned to me, the weight of every gaze pressed down. I drew a breath and told them I had decided to study software engineering. I explained I wanted to build something of my own, maybe develop applications that could change how people lived and worked. For a moment, no one spoke. The ticking of the clock filled the silence. My father set his fork down slowly, expression unreadable. My mother stared at her plate as though the food had suddenly lost all flavor. Lydia's smile froze. Then my father spoke, calm but colder than I had ever heard. "If you walk away from law, don't expect anything from me." The words didn't echo, but they hung in the air. Heavy, irreversible. A quiet ache rose in my chest, the kind that doesn't shatter you all at once, but hollows you out piece by piece. I didn't argue, didn't plead. I knew that any resistance would only make the wall grow taller. I nodded silently, realizing this was the moment everything changed. After dinner, I went to my room and began packing. I didn't have much, just a few clothes, my laptop, and a notebook filled with half-finished code. I tucked an old family photo between the pages, not because it gave me comfort, but because I needed to remember what I was walking away from. Stepping outside, the night air felt unfamiliar, sharp with both freedom and fear. The house glowed behind me, steady and distant. I didn't look back. On that quiet street, carrying nothing but a bag and a dream, I decided that losing everything they promised might be the only way to find myself. 6 months later, I was sharing a one-bedroom apartment with two strangers. The space was cramped, lit by a flickering kitchen light, with a heater that worked only when it felt like it. Still, it felt like mine in a way my parents' house never had. I worked as a barista at a coffee shop just 2 blocks away, pulling espresso shots for students and office workers who often glanced through me as if I weren't there. The pay barely covered my half of the rent, but it was enough to keep the lights on and buy instant noodles. Every morning before sunrise, I opened the cafe, wiped down tables, and practiced small talk I rarely used. After my shift, I walked to the library to study programming. My laptop was slow, my eyes perpetually tired, but coding gave me something steady when everything else felt uncertain. I taught myself JavaScript, Python, and a bit of design, learning through free tutorials and online forums. My savings dwindled faster than I expected. Rent, food, transportation. Everything slowly chipped away at what little I had left. The one luxury I refused to give up was internet access. Without it, I was cut off from the world I was trying to reach. I survived on cheap coffee and quiet determination. One rainy evening, as the cafe was about to close, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to see my Aunt Diane, my father's younger sister. She had once been a software engineer before leaving the corporate world to start her own tech consultancy. Unlike the rest of my family, she always treated me like I mattered. After closing, we sat down and I told her about my work, my studies, and how I was barely staying afloat. Diane smiled. "If you're serious about coding, come to my co-working space tomorrow. There's an empty desk next to mine," she said. The next day I went. Her office hummed with the quiet noise of computers, walls lined with whiteboards, the rich aroma of coffee lingering in the air. It felt alive. For the first time in months, I felt truly seen. Diane didn't offer money or pity, just space and Wi-Fi. I began spending every spare moment there, building something of my own, a mobile app called Home Ease. Simple, but useful, it connected homeowners with local repair freelancers. I wanted it to make everyday problems easier, like finding someone to fix a leaking pipe without endless calls. The idea came from my own struggles living in that apartment where everything seemed to break. Weeks passed, and my routine fell into a rhythm. Work, code, sleep, repeat. Each night, I watched the app take shape on my screen, like a fragile dream slowly gaining strength. When it finally worked, I submitted Home Ease to a startup competition in Boulder. I didn't expect much. It felt like sending a message in a bottle into the ocean. One morning, while steaming milk at the cafe, my phone buzzed with an email. I wiped my hands, unlocked the screen, and read, "You've been shortlisted for the final round." My hands trembled. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I reread the message 3 times, afraid it would disappear. I looked around the cafe at the noisy customers, the espresso machine hissing like a small engine, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That summer, everything began to change. The air in Boulder felt sharper, alive with possibility. The STAR competition had opened a door I never imagined I could step through. During one networking session, my aunt introduced me to her longtime friend, Alan Brooks, a local investor known for helping small tech founders get their first real break. Alan was in his early 50s, with a patient smile and the kind of calm confidence that comes from decades of watching ideas rise and fall. When Diane explained my app to him, he listened intently, asked questions I couldn't answer right away, and then said, "Let's meet next week. I want to see what you've built." That single meeting changed the rhythm of my life. Alan sat beside me as I presented Homies on my old laptop. The interface was still rough, but functional. He didn't dwell on the flaws. Instead, he studied the code and said, "There's something honest here. You built it to solve a real problem." He offered to mentor me and fund the early development in exchange for a small share of the project. I accepted immediately. From that day, my life became a cycle of coffee, code, and exhaustion. Alan met with me twice a week at the co-working space to review progress, while Diane reminded me, constantly, to eat something that wasn't instant noodles. With their guidance, I began improving the user experience, making it more intuitive and accessible. I reworked the color scheme, redesigned the onboarding screens, and wrote new lines of code until dawn. My hands ached from typing, but every small improvement made the app feel closer to the vision I had always imagined. Alan was firm but fair. When I rushed through explanations, he'd stop me. Take your time. Precision will save you later. He treated me not as a charity case, but as someone capable of building something meaningful. Diane's advice was different, gentle but sharp in its truth. One evening, when I complained about how long it was taking, she looked up from her laptop and said, "Build it with purpose, not revenge." Those words stayed with me. They forced me to question whether I was doing this to prove something to my parents, or to prove something to myself. By late August, we were ready for launch. I uploaded the first public version of Homies to the App Store, unsure if anyone would even notice. I watched the numbers climb slowly, one download at a time. The first review came from a woman in Denver. "This app saved my weekend." Then another from Seattle, then Chicago, and within weeks, it spread faster than I could track. People were using it to find plumbers, electricians, and handymen in minutes instead of hours. The system wasn't perfect, but it worked. The nights grew longer, the workload heavier. Yet I didn't feel drained. I felt alive in a way I hadn't since leaving home. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was creating. 3 months later, Homies hit 10,000 active users. The number didn't feel real until I saw an article on a local tech site. My photo beneath the headline, "Self-taught visionary from Boulder redefines home services." I stared at the screen, frozen. Later that night, Alan called to congratulate me. "You've done something incredible," he said. I thanked him, though words felt too small compared to the gratitude swelling inside me. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark office. The city lights flickered outside, and my mind wandered to the girl who had left her parents' house with nothing but a single suitcase. She would never have imagined the world would one day listen. By the time I turned 28, my app was everywhere. Homies had grown from a quiet experiment into a fully operational company, with an office overlooking downtown Boulder. Our team was young, ambitious, and endlessly full of ideas. I had swapped my old laptop for a proper workspace, humming with computers and the aroma of strong coffee, reminding me of my barista days. Sometimes I arrived before sunrise, watching lights spill across the city, thinking about how something so small had grown into a life I never expected. The company expanded faster than I could keep track of. We brought on developers, designers, and marketing specialists, all younger, sharper, and hungrier than I had been when I began. Their conversations carried a rhythm of optimism tangled with exhaustion. Week after week, we hit new milestones: partnerships with repair chains, collaborations with universities, even a program providing free home services for single parents. Watching the platform evolve was like witnessing a living thing grow stronger with every pulse. One morning, an invitation arrived to speak at a tech conference in San Francisco. It felt surreal. I had once written code alone in a rented apartment, afraid to hope too much. And now I was stepping onto a stage filled with industry leaders, sharing my story. I spoke about failure, persistence, and how purpose often hides in rejection. The applause was warm, but what stayed with me most were the quiet nods from people who truly understood. That same year, my Aunt Diane retired. She wanted to travel before her knees started complaining. We met for lunch at the same cafe where I had once poured coffee for strangers. She laughed as I described the new office, the investors, the endless meetings. Before leaving, I handed her an envelope transferring a share of the company to her. She protested at first. "You gave me my first desk. You deserve this more than anyone," I told her. Her eyes glistened with pride, and for the first time, I realized how much of my courage had come from her. But success rarely exists in isolation. One afternoon, a news alert flashed across my phone. Quinn and Associates under investigation for financial misconduct. I stared at the headline, feeling that strange mix of disbelief and inevitability. My father, the man who had once been the standard of success in our family, was now under scrutiny from the authorities. The firm that had stood strong for decades was unraveling under its own ambition. Lydia had stepped in to manage part of the firm after law school, and according to the reports, she was struggling to contain the chaos. For days, I tried not to dwell on it. The rational part of me reminded me it wasn't my responsibility. Yet at night, I found my thoughts drifting, imagining how it must feel for them. The quiet tension at dinner, the sharp undercurrent of regret hanging in the air. I thought of how Dad had once spoken with unshakable certainty, and how swiftly that certainty could collapse, faster even than trust itself. Then one evening, while I was reviewing reports in my office, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a familiar name. It was Mom. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was gentle, careful, as though she feared I might hang up. "Riley," she said, "your father wants to talk." I said nothing for a long moment. Outside the window, the city lights flickered like distant memories. The office was quiet except for the faint hum of machines. In the silence, I could almost hear my father's voice, the same one that once told me what I couldn't do. But this time, the power had shifted. I was no longer the child seeking approval. I was someone who had built her own world from the ground up. I drew a slow breath and replied, "Tell him I'll call tomorrow." When their names appeared on my phone, I already felt the weight in my chest before answering. My assistant had mentioned earlier that people were waiting in the lobby, but hadn't said who. The moment I approached the glass doors and saw Richard's rigid, proud posture, an act of control he no longer truly held, I understood that this day was unavoidable. Mom stood beside him, her expression soft but measured. Lydia lingered a step behind, clutching a handbag she kept tightening her grip on. I led them into the conference room. The room was still, except for the low hum of the city outside. None of them spoke at first. Richard's eyes swept over the polished table, the glass walls, the company logo behind me. It wasn't admiration I saw, but calculation, as if he were measuring the worth of everything in the room, including me. Finally, he cleared his throat. "We came to talk about the company." His voice still carried that courtroom authority, though a subtle tremor ran beneath it. Mom glanced at him before adding, "You've done so well, Riley. We're proud of you." I didn't respond. Silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Richard pressed on, "Your mother, and I believe it's only fair that we receive our share. After all, we raised you, supported you. We gave you the foundation to succeed." I studied him carefully. "You want money?" I asked. "We want fairness," he said. 50%. You wouldn't be who you are without us. This isn't greed. It's about what's right." For a moment, I felt the familiar chill of the girl who once lingered outside his office door, desperate to be seen and heard. But that girl was gone. I leaned back and let the words settle in the room before replying. "Do you remember what you said when I left home? You told me, if you walk away from law, don't expect anything from me. You gave me nothing. Remember that?" Richard's jaw tightened. Mom reached across the table, her voice almost pleading. "Riley, we just want to make things fair again." "Fair," I repeated softly. "Fair would have been believing in me when I needed it. Fair would have been letting me exist without having to earn it." No one spoke. The past hung between us like a shadow. Lydia kept her eyes lowered, tracing invisible circles on the table with her finger. When I finally looked at her, she lifted her gaze. There was something raw in her eyes, envy wrapped in regret. "I didn't know it would come to this," she whispered. I nodded. Neither did I, but it did. Richard exhaled sharply, as if the air itself had betrayed him. "You're ungrateful," he said, "after everything we've done for you." I offered a faint smile. Not joy, but quiet acknowledgement. Maybe gratitude looks different when you've built yourself from nothing. He pushed back his chair. The scrape of legs against the floor echoed like an old argument resurfacing. Mom stood beside him, eyes glistening. Lydia hesitated, then followed. They said nothing as they left, their reflections fading across the glass walls as the door closed. For a long while, I remained alone. Beyond the window, the skyline shimmered. a mosaic of gold and blue stretching across the horizon. Their voices lingered faintly, tangled with the hum of traffic below. I thought of all they had taken, and all they could no longer touch. I didn't feel anger anymore. Only distance, the kind-born not of hatred, but of clarity. They had built walls of expectation. I had built a life beyond them. 2 days later, they returned, this time accompanied by a lawyer. Security called ahead, their voices low and uncertain. I told them to send them up. When the elevator doors opened, Richard stepped out first, wearing the same suit he probably reserved for moments of control. Mom followed, her face pale under the office lights. Lydia trailed slightly behind, more shadow than presence. Beside them was a man in a dark gray jacket, briefcase polished to perfection. He introduced himself as their attorney, name spoken quickly, as if it hardly mattered. He handed me a heavy envelope, sealed and formal. "They're filing a claim," he said, "seeking financial restitution and partial ownership of Homies." I listened quietly. The words were practiced, stripped of emotion, but each one carried a heavy weight. Richard's eyes met mine. "You could make this easier for everyone," he said. "Just agree to a settlement. It's not worth the fight." I folded the envelope without opening it. "You've already made it worth the fight," I said. The lawyer cleared his throat, mentioning parental contributions, moral equity, family rights. None of it mattered. They were trying to rewrite a story that had already been concluded. 3 months later, the court dismissed the case entirely. The ruling was unambiguous, no legal grounds, no entitlement, no claim. I didn't attend the hearing. My legal team emailed me the verdict. A few lines that closed a chapter years in the making. But the real judgment had been written long before. In every moment I was told I wasn't enough. Richard sold the family house soon after, using the proceeds to cover his debts. The once grand property on Willow Creek was emptied. Furniture gone, chandeliers packed in silence. Neighbors whispered about the Quinns' fall, though no one dared say it to their faces. Mom vanished from social circles, her charity friends finding new subjects for their photo ops. Lydia's name surfaced months later when the state bar suspended her license for falsifying tax documents while managing a client's account. She never reached out to me, and I never called her. Between us remained only the echo of choices. One morning, walking downtown, I paused in front of an old building that had once housed Quinn and Associates. The family plaque was faint beneath the dust. I stood there for a long while, remembering the days I'd waited in the lobby, trying to shrink small enough to be accepted. Then I bought the building, not as a trophy, but as reclamation. Months later, after renovations, it reopened as the Homies Learning Center, a training hub for young developers who couldn't afford college tuition. The walls gleamed white. The air smelled of new computers and possibility. During the opening ceremony, I stepped onto the small stage. The crowd was quiet, expectant. I looked at the screen behind me, where our first group of students sat, smiling nervously at the future they were about to shape. "Some things you build from nothing," I said. That was the point. Silence lingered for a moment, then applause rose. Soft, yet certain, like closure itself. Afterward, as lights dimmed and guests left, I walked through the empty halls. The glass walls reflected my face. Older, steadier, no longer seeking approval. Outside, the city glowed against the night. For the first time in years, it felt like home. A year later, I drove past the old house one last time. The gate leaned sideways, paint peeling like memory. Windows were dark, curtains gone, ivy curling around the frames as if the house wanted to hide its past. I sat in the car, watching time quietly erase what had once felt permanent. There were no voices, no music, just the whisper of wind through broken porch rails. I didn't stop. Some doors no longer need reopening. That evening, I visited Aunt Diane, retired in a small cottage outside Boulder, filled with books, mismatched teacups, and the soft hum of an old radio. We cooked together, laughing about early days when I tried coding and burning toast at the same time. She told me she'd always known I would build something meaningful. Not out of spite, but with purpose. When I got home, my inbox overflowed with articles and messages. One headline read, "From Disinherited to Industry Leader." I stared at it, thinking how strange it felt to be summed up in a sentence. Success had stopped feeling like revenge long ago. It had become something quieter, steadier, a peace I didn't need to justify. Weeks later, a letter arrived from Lydia. The handwriting was careful, rewritten many times before sending. She apologized for everything, finally acknowledging what I had endured. I read it once and folded it neatly back into the envelope. Some apologies are meant to be accepted silently. That night, I opened my laptop to check the latest update on the new Homies feature. The screen glowed in the dark. As the final line of code compiled, the words appeared at the top, built from nothing. I smiled, closed the laptop, and let the light fade into stillness. No one can take away your true worth unless you hand it to them. Recognition comes when you stop chasing it from others and start creating it yourself. When they say you get nothing, it isn't always a curse. Sometimes it's the beginning of everything. Starting from nothing doesn't mean having less. It means having the freedom to define what everything truly means. Thank you for listening to the very end of my story. If you've ever walked a path no one believed in, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Maybe your story will be the reason someone else keeps going when it feels impossible. Sometimes, all it takes is one story to remind us why we first believed in ourselves.